Now, Diane, thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us. This is huge news. What can you tell us about this decision?
It really is, Don. And look, we've been following this since early this afternoon when the governor announced that he did not think that it was safe or it was a health issue for them to go through with this primary tomorrow. I want to read the statement that just came down from him here. He said to conduct an election tomorrow would force poll workers and voters to place themselves at an unacceptable health risk of contracting coronavirus. As such, Health Director Dr. Amy Acton will order the polls closed as a health emergency. Now, Don, we're still trying to work through what exactly this means here because a few hours ago, a judge actually ruled against what the governor was recommending here and said that the primary had to continue. They could not postpone it. Initially, the governor and the Secretary of State had come out and said they wanted to postpone the election until June 2nd because of concerns over the health of not just the voters, but these poll workers, people who are going to be there for 13 hours tomorrow. And the judge said, I'm sorry, you haven't proved that. But now the governor appearing to say instead they're calling it a health emergency again, Don. We're still trying to work through exactly what this means and whether or not people will be able to vote tomorrow.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that reporting. And speaking of, I have the Ohio Secretary of State on the phone right now, Frank LaRose. Frank, thank you so much for joining us. Closing an election, I mean, that is a very big deal. There will be a lot of questions about this decision. First of all, good evening to you. Why was your election called off? Why has it been called off, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Don. So as of last night, we had been taking advice from public health officials that were telling us that it was safe for both voters and for poll workers to come to the polls on Tuesday. We were prepared to run elections. That advice changed radically this morning. I received a call from the governor and the lieutenant governor and the health director, and they made it clear that with the new CDC guidance limiting mass gatherings to no more than 50 persons, and with the guidance that Ohioans over 65 should not venture out unless they had an absolute necessity to do so, that it was simply not going to be possible to conduct an election in a way that was going to be safe for Ohioans. And so, as you saw tonight, the health director made an order. I responded by sending out a directive, which effectively tells the boards of elections that we're going to comply with the health director's order. That was a difficult decision. Ultimately, I think the right decision, because, again, the only thing that takes precedent over a free and fair election, the only thing, would be the health and safety of Ohioans. And that's exactly what the decision that the governor had to make tonight was. That's the decision that Dr. Acton had to make. That's what decisive leadership requires during a challenging time like this. And what I directed the boards to prepare for is to conduct an election on June 2nd. That gives us time to continue accepting vote-by-mail ballots and then to have our in-person voting on June 2nd. It's important that we create a sense of certainty about that for the people of Ohio, and I look forward to doing what we do best here, and that's making sure that we can run a free and fair election.
Let me jump in here, because a couple of things I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about that vote-by-mail thing, and then you said so in-person voting on June 2nd is what you want. I see that I have a statement here from the governor. Mike DeWine is saying during this time when we face an unprecedented public health crisis, to conduct an election tomorrow would force poll workers. You have two woulds in there, so you may want to correct that. Would force poll workers and voters to place themselves at an unacceptable health risks of contracting the coronavirus. As such, Health Director Dr. Amy Acton will order the polls closed as a health emergency, and then you go on. Okay, so listen. One thing. How can the health director order the polls closed when a judge just said a few hours ago tonight that they should stay open? I mean, why didn't you appeal, go through the courts? Tell us, take us through that.
Yeah, again, Don, what the health director has is broad authority to protect the health of Ohioans. There's a reason why that's created in law, because in a public health emergency such as this, difficult decisions are going to need to be made. Again, the question about whether to go on with challenging this and appealing to courts in the middle of the night would create more uncertainty. The governor's decision, I think, was a wise one to create some finality here so that poll workers know that we're not going to order them to go to the polls tomorrow morning when it is detrimental to their health.
So that's not a violation of the judge's orders?
Again, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to be the
okay.
one to figure that out. But I will say that 35,000 Ohioans who are set to work the polls tomorrow. We're waiting for some closure and some finality on this. I think that the governor's order does that. I think that my directive lays out the path forward. There will be an election. The people of Ohio will have a chance to make their voice heard, and that's exactly what we're focused on.
All right, let's
now.
talk more about that, because Democrats in Ohio supported this decision earlier today, but wanted the state to explore more, as you just discussed, vote by mail options going forward, and much earlier than June 2nd. So talk to me about that.
So Ohio has actually a long history of vote by mail. We've been a leader on this. It's something Ohioans are comfortable with. And what this would do if we conducted the election under my directive that was sent out on June 2nd is we would have a very long period of vote by mail, effectively for the next 10 weeks or so. And then this gets us to at least as far out as we can, because remember, the Democratic Convention is on July 13th. We owe them a list of delegates. And so in order for that to happen and for the final tabulation of results and certification of that results to happen, June 2nd is the day that I thought best that hopefully gets us past this public health crisis that we have. Again, the decisive action that the governor took should create a scenario where that can be the case, and that's our goal.
So the governor is a Republican. He has canceled or delayed a Democratic primary. Are you prepared to answer questions about whether there is any partisanship to this decision?
Yeah, no, and to be clear, this is both a Republican and Democratic primary. Of course, the contest on the Democratic side is perhaps more aggressive right now, but there are Republican candidates running in primaries at the state legislative level, at the local level, and so there is both a Republican and Democratic primary going on. And I want to be clear that here in Ohio, we've really been working together in a bipartisan way. I've been on the phone with the Democratic chairman and the Republican chairman throughout the entirety of this, because this is one of those moments where really it's not about one party or the other. It's about making sure that we can have a fair election and a safe election.
Yeah. Well, the country's paying attention to the presidential race, so that's why I asked that question. Thank you, Frank LaRose. I appreciate the Ohio Secretary of State. Ohio is moving its primary. It's canceling the primary tomorrow, and it's going to be on June 2nd. So stay tuned. Again, our thanks to Frank LaRose, Ohio Secretary of State.
It was another hideous day on Wall Street. Markets plunging today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average sinking down almost 3,000 points. Its worst closing day since 1987. 1987. Let's go straight to CNN's Allison Kosik at the New York Stock Exchange. And Allison, the largest point loss ever today, is that right?
The biggest and worst point loss ever for the Dow, really jaw-dropping. And if you watch what happened as the president was speaking and what he was saying, it's when he said that the outbreak could last until July or August. That's when the Dow kind of nosedived, hundreds of points. And as he was talking, the closing bell rang, almost to a relief to everybody on the floor here of the New York Stock Exchange, because this is going to obviously hurt the economy much longer than everybody expected. I mean, you think about what happens here at the stock exchange with investors and traders trading stocks and buying and selling. It's all about trying to predict the future and what it's going to be like, how stocks could be priced. But now that we're hearing that this outbreak could last into the summer, how do you even price for that? So that's why we saw all the selling toward the close and as the president was speaking. And this is despite the Federal Reserve's action over the weekend, cutting interest rates to zero, pouring billions of dollars into mortgage-backed securities and government bonds. There's only so much monetary policy can do at this point. What investors want to see is the number of coronavirus cases peak and then fall. Jake?
Allison, let me just ask you, health experts and health officials have been saying for weeks now, certainly for the last week, that this was going to last months and not weeks. President Trump, what he said today, that this could last until July or August, it's in alignment with what these health experts have been saying. The only difference is that President Trump was acknowledging the reality. I guess my point is, if this news had been given weeks ago or over the weekend, or if this reality had been acknowledged by the president earlier, would what happened on Wall Street today be different? Did Wall Street not know what the health experts were saying?
I think it probably was stunning to hear the president have a different tone today, very different from what we've seen in the past, with him acknowledging that this is bad and this is going to last longer than expected. I think that at this point there was hope that this would end a lot earlier. But obviously with the president now acknowledging that it's going to be bad and could last a lot longer, I think that's why you're seeing this sort of this real quick shock to the market that we saw today. Never mind what happened this morning. There's also an underlying worry that the Federal Reserve sees something that investors don't see, meaning are the credit markets freezing up more than experts had realized? Why did the Federal Reserve make this decision on a Sunday when, by the way, Jake, its meeting starts tomorrow? It could have waited till tomorrow or even Wednesday.
The pictures become a symbol in Italy of a system in the north of the country that is stretched to its limit. Hospital workers, nurses, doctors, the heroes of the fight against coronavirus, themselves near breaking point.
We are united, and we will fight this forsaken virus.
At a hospital in Milan, hallways and offices have been turned into makeshift intensive care units. In Brescia, tents are used to treat the sick. Rome, too, beefing up its capacity. When he locked down the country, the Prime Minister explained.
We live in a system in which we guarantee health and the right of everyone to be cured.
Italy's healthcare system is facing a challenge like no other. By its nature, this is an epidemic that spikes quickly and in clusters requiring urgent and expensive treatment for some. So far, the system here has delivered free tests, intensive care, emergency treatment, all free of charge. So is Europe's often criticized public health system now showing its true strength?
To get an X-ray, somebody wants to get treatment, they can wait weeks or months for an appointment. That's the inefficiency of national health. But the plus side is that at a time of crisis, the tests for coronavirus are free for everybody. They take care of all their citizens, and there's no worrying about insurance.
So how does Italy's system stack up against America's private, profit-driven healthcare system? First, on capacity. As the crisis hits, the United States has 2.8 hospital beds per 1,000 people, fewer than Italy's 3.2 beds per 1,000 people, according to the OECD. Then, once the outbreak begins, there's the question of the response. And here, the more fragmented American model could make coordination harder.
To deal with an epidemic which affects the population globally, the response must be centralized. There must be one crisis unit that gives a unanimous response.
As infections continue to rise here at record daily rates, Italy is a country where everyone fears getting the virus, but no one need worry about being treated for it. Melissa Bell, CNN, Rome.